Okay. This is Waste Management 1, Stage 1, 8.88 miles of 2013 STPR. Yay! It's a bit sloppy from Ricky yesterday, but we're hoping it's cleared up a bit today. That's funny. Hey, it's this guy. Sorry, guy, I don't remember names. Hey!
Hey, how's it going?
Going fine, how about yourself?
Good. Kieran, there is a car off shortly after the start.
Okay.
They didn't give us any more details, but you should be clear.
Cool, thank you.
Nice to ride, you got it.
Awesome.
See you later.
Thanks.
30 seconds.
Okay. See ya. We are armed. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go. 100. Left 5 minus. Right 4. Into left 5 minus over crest 50. Right 4 plus over small crest slippy. Left 5 long over small crest slippy. 50. Left 5 plus 50. Right 6, 50. Crest into turn right 2 minus over crest. Repeat, turn right 2 minus over crest. Looks clean. Don't cut. 70 through gate. Rough, slippy. Left 5 minus down into left 2 minus. $120. Left 4 plus over crest 70. Turn right 2 minus 70. Woohoo! Yeah. Clean. Small crest into a left 5. Right 4 plus 120. Left 6 over small crest 50. Stay left over crest, kinks 180. Don't lift. Left 5 minus long, tightens over crest, rough. Repeat, left 5 minus long, tightens over crest, rough. Into right 5 long over small crest 70.
Say again?
Right 5 long over small crest 70. Bump, stay left. Into right 5 plus long 200. Left 5 minus over crest. Stay in. Opens over small crest. Wait. Okay, yeah. Right 6, no cuts. Right 6 over small crest, tightens into crest 70. I may be off.
No, this is the right 6,
Okay.
tightens.
Okay.
Next.
Yep, right 5 minus, opens long over small crest 50. Left 5 minus into right 5 minus short narrow 30. Right 5 plus short. Into left 5 minus. Here's your right 5 plus short into left 5 minus 70. Right 6 into right 3 slippy. Left 4 minus short into left 2 minus slippy. Into caution bump. Right 6. Ush. Into right 4 over water. Left 4 minus 50. long small crest, turn right 2 plus, past tree, tightens. Repeat, right 2 plus, past tree, tightens. Left 6 plus over crest, nice. Right 4 minus 100. Small crest, left 4 long, opens long. Repeat, left 4 long, opens long. Stay right over small crest 70. Left 5, 120. Turn left 3, no cut, 60. Right 2 plus. Left 3, no cut, 60. Right 2 plus. 150. Left 3 slippy into crest 100. Crest into right 4 over small jump, long over crest. 30. Caution, right 4 minus over jump, tightens. Repeat. 30, right 4 minus over jump, tightens, slippy. Left 5 plus over crest, 50. Right 2 minus, slippy. Right 3 over crest. Left 2 long off camber. Right 3 minus extra long, tightens over crest. Repeat, right 3 minus extra long, tightens over crest. Right 3, 50. Left 2, stay in, opens long. Repeat, left 2, stay in, opens long. Into small crest, into a left 4 minus over crest, opens, tightens 3 over crest. 50. Right 3 minus 100. Stay left over crest into a right 4. Right 3 plus. Or sorry, left 3 plus, left 3 plus. 50. Caution, slippy into turn left 2. Into turn left 3 minus. Into right 4 plus. Left 4. Into right 3 minus over small crest. Or over water, sorry, over water. Left 4 minus over double crest into water. Right 3 over crest. Left 2 plus over crest into right 4 minus. Left 4 plus over crest off camber into small jump into left 4 late. Repeat, small jump into, oh, it's a straight 3 minus, sorry. 50, turn left 2 plus over crest. Left 5 minus over crest down, opens into caution jump into right 6 over bumps. This is your jump. Good. Into slippy. Right 5 minus over small crest, opens, tightens 3 plus. Left 4. Into right 4 over small crest, opens, into crest. Into left 2 off camber, long, slippy. Right 2 minus, opens. Into crest. 80. Right 2 minus over crest, deceptive. 30. Right 3 opens. Right 2, deceptive. 30. Right 3 opens, 100. Left 5 plus, 30. Left 5 minus over off camber into right 2. There's your left 5 minus off camber into right 2. Turn left 2 opens,
Big rock.
turn left 2 opens, tightens 3. into right 4 minus off camber. Crest 70, right 4 off camber, slippy, into kinks 180. Right 5 minus, into turn right 2 plus. Left 5 minus, right 3. Into slippy, left 3 plus, tightens 2 plus. Repeat, left 3 plus, tightens 2 plus. Into right 5 long. Small crest 70, turn left 2 minus loose. Repeat, turn left 2 minus loose. Exhaust. Right 3 plus long. 50. Caution, turn left 3 minus. Narrow through gate. Right 4 plus short. Into turn left 5 minus over small crest 70. Turn left 4 long over jump 150. Go, go, go. Small crest 30, left 4 plus long. Into left 6 plus over left 6 plus extra long over triple small crest. 120. Right 6 plus, keep going, keep going. There's your right 6 plus into long small crest. 70. Left 6 plus over small crest 180. Go, go, go. Don't lift, don't lift. Go, go, go. Stay right over small crest 70, turn left 2 plus easy. Go, 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 go. 50. Stay right over small jump 70. Right 4 plus opens, very long 70. Small crest 50. Repeat, small crest 50. Caution, turn left 2 minus. Repeat, small crest 50, caution, turn left 2 minus, narrow. Right 4 is short, into left 4 minus short over a small crest, into right 4 long, 50, left 2. There's your left 2. Small crest into right 2 plus long, down, tightens, 50. Right 5 minus short, 70. Dip into right 6 plus, right 6 long, repeat, dip into right 6 long, 70. Right 5 plus, long, slippy, tightens 4. Into crest, into left 6. Here's your tightens 4. Into crest, into a left 6, 200, slippy. Caution, left 5, into right 3, slippy. Into left 2 plus short. Repeat, left 5, right 3, slippy. Left 2 plus short. Kinks 120. Right 4 short, into left 2 plus short, slippy. Right 3 short, left 2 plus, right 2, left 3 minus, tightens tidy. Into right 3 minus, left 2, 50. Right 1 plus slippy, into left 3 plus. Right 3 plus, 50. Left 3 plus off camber. Right 3 plus. Left 6, 50. Right 4 is short, into left 3, slippy.
Next.
right 2 minus, into stay left over jump, into right 3 late, into left 4 plus, 180, caution right 6, into turn left 1 plus over small crest. Repeat, left 1 plus over small crest. $100. Right 5 plus over small crest long. Tightens 4 plus over crest long. Over finish 100. Repeat, tightens 4 plus. Good job. Yeah. Hey.
Door.